in for the last 3 years. I'm very lucky to be on this book tour with Brian. And I must say the luckiest thing about it is that we get to come to fantastic communities like this one and start feeling like we're part of the community, and then, it's going to be hard to leave. So you people are really blessed. You're very fortunate to have each other and to have people like Charlie Mossbrook. Just what an incredible voice. We're definitely, I'm going to get one of those CDs to add to our library. I wanted to just say we want to let people know that the Western New York Peace Center is a big sponsor of this tour. They underwrote some of our train travel, and then, all you people. So thank you. I don't think I need to introduce Brian, do I? He'll speak for himself. He's going to tell you his whole life story.
Just put this on your lap. It'll be right there. Oh. Nice. Yeah, it'll pick it up.
That's it?
Yeah, it'll pick it up.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Well, thank you, Clevelanders, for inviting me to Cleveland, and Mary Jo for organizing this event. I could actually enjoy just listening to Charlie's music more than I particularly want to come up here and talk right now, because I really love that music. But I am on this book tour. The book came out officially on August 1st this year, and it was after being rejected by 33 publishers. I finally got a publisher to publish the book. I spent 8 years writing it. And basically, it's a book that kind of has 3 parts. The first part is a fairly specific description of my journey from a small town in upstate New York, not too far from here in Chautauqua County in western New York, through lots of experiences, including Vietnam and many other countries, that describes my personal journey from being a very naive country boy to being somebody that had to wake up, was forced to wake up and begin asking a lot of questions. The second part is kind of my search for really carefully examining the effects of U.S. imperialism all over the world. So I've traveled to a lot of countries, studying in depth what happens to cultures and people when they're impacted by Western cultures that are imposing themselves, as specifically my culture, the United States culture. And there's a third portion of the book that's kind of about my spiritual journey of how I'm dealing with questioning all of Western civilization, all the assumptions that I grew up with, and where does that lead us, and where does that lead me? It's a 500-page book. It has a complete index. It's got 536 endnotes, so it has an academic quality to it. It's got 8 pages of recommended readings. It has 112 photographs that pretty much document my life from being a little kid to today. But the book was a product of a question I had to ask myself. Actually, it was a question that never left me after I left Vietnam. It was a question that haunted me for years. I was drafted in 1966. I was a chicken hawk, if some of you remember what that word meant. meant I was a hawk on the war, but I was a chicken, didn't want to go fight in the war. But I got drafted. I was in graduate school. I thought I had escaped the draft because I had a school deferment, but I fell through a loophole. And so I enlisted in the Air Force as an officer. I went for a 4-year program, and I had a plush job for 2 years in Headquarters Air Force in Washington, and then I got assigned to an Air Force Ranger unit, which I did not know existed, and was sent off to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for 12 weeks of Ranger training, Air Force Ranger training, and then went to Vietnam. And I was only in Vietnam 5 months before I was sent home, because I had a really radical turnaround in my whole philosophy, my own values, my political perspective. And I was just a very straight kid. I was a very happy young man, and it was kind of shocking to me that I was really going through such an incredible radical change in a very short period of time. It just wasn't like me to do that. Just seemed inconceivable that I would have gone from where I started to where I started questioning things in 1969. And before I go into more details, I want to say that from my Vietnam experience, there was a question that has haunted me. And you've heard these talks before. I usually do discuss this question because it's central to what motivated me to write the book. And the question was this: how was it so easy for a young kid like me to follow an order to go 9,000 miles from my hometown to other people's villages I knew nothing about and participate in destroying their village life? Now, it's a fairly easy, superficial answer to that question. It's you're at a point in history where your country's at war, and it calls young people to go to war, and that was simply where I got caught. I was totally anti-communist. I totally was into fighting the commies everywhere. 1959, my senior year in high school, my favorite book that year was Masters of Deceit, written by J. Edgar Hoover. I thought that book was going to tell me how to identify communists in my town. And so that's where I was at. But after Vietnam, even before I left Vietnam, when I realized I was on the wrong side, if there are sides, I was on the wrong side, and I couldn't believe that. How could that be? But how was it so easy that I participated and followed an order? And of course, people have been doing it for centuries, maybe millenniums. But nonetheless, my soul wouldn't rest. It's like, that is just not something that it just wasn't right. It just wasn't me. It wasn't the real me. And so the book is called a psychohistorical memoir. And I call it that because to answer the question, I had to do years and years of study of anthropology, deep history, archaeology, psychology, especially Jungian psychology, evolutionary biology. I wanted to get a bigger picture of this whole big journey of human beings on the planet. And so I studied Paleolithic societies, and then Neolithic societies, and then the emergence of what we call civilization about 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, where we really did begin institutionalizing obedience to vertical power structures. So it's like we've been in that for 300 generations or so. Unless you were lucky enough to be an indigenous culture that wasn't assimilated, pretty much we've all learned to adapt to the culture we grew up in, to obey the mores and the laws and the rules of our society, which has, of course, a lot of assumptions to it, that our society is good, and in our case, we thought it's really exceptionally good. And so it has been happening for many generations. We obey our authority figures. And there's always exceptions, but for the most part, this has been going on for thousands of years. And yet, I felt there was something else in the human condition, in my human condition, that predated that. Basically, there has to be an archetype somewheres of the human evolutionary journey that really understood that empathy and cooperation and mutual respect and equity, or a sense of fairness, was as important, if not more important, than all other human characteristics. And empathy certainly is one that ties us all together. All humans are tied together by empathy. We're all connected in one we. Of course, I knew nothing about that. I was very successful in my first 25 years of adapting to the major values of capitalist economics, one being individualism versus community, competition versus cooperation, and acquisition versus inquisition, meaning acquiring things, seeking material things, rather than being inquisitive, rather than asking deep questions and having a curiosity. And so I was just sailing along. And then in April of 1969, I went into a village in Vinlong province in Mekong Delta. Part of my job was documenting the after effects of bombing missions. My main job was I was in charge of 40 men protecting air bases and protecting the fighter bombers from being attacked so that they could continue their bombing missions. While I was in Vietnam, I think we were attacked 17 times. And so it was my men that were on the perimeter with the machine guns and the mortars and the starlight scopes, making sure that nobody penetrated the base. If they did penetrate the base, I could call in a spooky AC-47 with all these lights and machine guns, and they would rush in and rescue us from any type of being overrun. But I had an extra duty. The Vietnamese commander of Binh Thuy, where I was initially, 90 miles south of Saigon, south of Ho Chi Minh City, he asked me to go with one of his lieutenants to make sure that the pilots were hitting their targets. I thought it was a strange request, but it was a daytime mission. It was not dangerous, and I hated actually being on the base with all the other gringo officers. So actually, getting off the base each day was something that was actually a benefit to me in a way. I had my own Jeep. During the day, I could drive into Canto City whenever I wanted to. We were on duty at night. So I said, okay, and he said there was a rumor that this new pilot corps had been infiltrated by the VC, and their intention was to sabotage bombing targets. I was very naive. I said, okay, and so the Vietnamese lieutenant guided me driving my Jeep to an area about 4 miles from Binh Thuy on this really little raised road. And when we got close to where we were stopping, there was smoke coming from behind the high grass. We called it elephant grass. And as we got out of the Jeep and worked through the grass, I heard this loud screaming roar from my right, and I looked to the right, and there was this farm animal, which we called the water buffalo, on its side with a huge gash in its belly, and a third of its skull gone, and was just screaming in pain. And I was kind of initially jolted and kind of almost in shock, I think. And as I turned to my left, all I saw were bodies of people. And the bombings were all done with 500-pound bombs and then napalm bombs, which finishes people off. It envelops people in flames, asphyxiates the air. So if you're not burned to death, usually you